Ongoing situation in Iran. I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today.
That was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt speaking earlier today. And indeed, the world is waiting for President Donald Trump's decision on whether the U.S. will join Israel in military action to wipe out Tehran's nuclear facilities. As he weighs his option, Trump is being squeezed by different pressures from forces at home and abroad. The president huddled with advisors in the Situation Room twice already this week and was set to do so again today. He approved attack plans presented to him, but was waiting to see if Iran would be willing to negotiate and hasn't made a final decision. Basically, if the U.S. gets involved, then every regional and global actor will too, all to varying degrees of engagement. Israel seems dead set on doing something inflammatory at any rate within the coming days. Here's Israel's ambassador to the U.S. from an interview earlier today.
Pulled off a number of surprises. When the dust settles, you're going to see some surprises on Thursday night and Friday that will make the beeper operation almost seem simple.
Basically, So seems like they're going to try and do in the Ayatollah Thursday night, tonight, or Friday. That's my prediction on the manner of the operation. But hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that still believes in crazy stuff like international law and national sovereignty. And to be clear, we don't think those things exist. We just think that they should. Today, we're going to continue with our Iran reporting and analysis with Dr. Assal, a scholar of Middle East history. She completed a PhD in history from the University of California, Irvine in 2018 and is the author of State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran. I know you're very busy right now. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So before, I was thinking about involuntarily subjecting my audience to a 3-minute monologue, potentially. Haven't decided yet. I was hoping we could get your read on the overarching situation as things stand at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Thursday.
Honestly, it's hard to get a read on anything because and this is, I think, has been the case, especially from a U.S. perspective with the Trump administration in terms of their messaging. Like even when they were engaging in negotiations or talks with Iran, the messaging kept going back and forth. At first, Steve Witkoff said Iran could enrich to 3.67%, and then immediately came back and said, no, they can't enrich. And that kind of language has gone back and forth. And even now, it seems like, President Trump is on the verge of wanting to attack, but now he's scaling it back. But is he really scaling it back? I mean, it's a very convoluted kind of thing to look at. But I think what it's indicative of is splits within his own party, splits within his own base. And we've seen that play out in real time because you have the sort of Iran hawk camp, the people with the likes of Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, or Lindsey Graham, who have long wanted a war with Iran. And then you have voices that are within the Trump camp who are speaking out, right? Someone like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are actually saying, wait, but why are we doing this? And that is based on the fact that Trump himself has framed his platform as someone who is, anti-interventionist, anti-war. I mean, he just gave a speech a few weeks ago in Saudi Arabia about the failures of Western interventionism. So it's bizarre to be in this place where, for some reason, we're entering a war that Israel started while Israel is still committing genocide in Gaza. So we haven't gotten an end to the war in Ukraine. We haven't gotten an end to the genocide in Gaza. And not only has he not ended those, but we're considering starting a new war that when you talk about it, it's just that it is impossible to predict the ramifications of this kind of war. It's impossible. Nobody knows. Anybody who claims to know is not telling the truth. There's no way of knowing what direction can go in. You can just, make an educated guess that says the potential is far, far reaching. And if you look at the context and the country statistics of Iraq in 2003 and Iran in 2025, the potential is much, much worse than what was thought back in 2003 about Iraq. Now, the current situation, as Trump has said, as you played at the beginning, they're going to let sort of potential talks again play out over the next 2 weeks. We'll have to see if that's even real.
Right. And, I kind of before we started recording, we talked about having more of a discussion. And from the military aspect, the 2 weeks seems kind of like it correlates to when Israel may have to be resupplied with air defense artillery systems, which is kind of interesting. This is a working theory, open to criticism. But what we're seeing essentially is an aerial distance conflict between Israel and Iran enter into its second week, with each party playing a game of like munitions brinksmanship. Iran leveraging its long-range ballistic missile stockpiles against Israel's vastly more expensive Arrow 3 missile interceptors, which are reportedly low, like run out in 10 to 12 days low, according to sources cited by Times of Israel and Israel Hayom, and et cetera, et cetera. So Israel claims to have destroyed 40% of Iran's long-range launchers, which is overwhelmingly likely to be inflated. Basically, Iran uses the same kind of decoy techniques that the Houthi does. A lot of launchers are like inflatable, not really in use anymore. Generally, when they come out to shoot, they come out of a tunnel, fire, move back in, relocate to another tunnel exit, things like that, when you don't have air superiority like the Houthis don't. And we actually saw the videos of two F-14 Tomcats, old decommissioned U.S. fighter craft, get blown up on the runway, and the IDF put that on their official social media channel. And I was looking at like from guys who from like myself and other guys that have military experience, looking at battle damage assessments. And they just basically shot these what we think are decoy aircraft because there wasn't a secondary explosion, which means there wasn't any fuel inside them, but they're on a runway. It's kind of weird. So it's also from a military perspective, it's from an open source perspective, because we don't have access to like secret or top secret information anymore. It just looks overwhelmingly like obscured by the fog of war, but Iran does seem to have diminishing salvos coming and going, depending on what kind of ordnance they're using. And likewise, Israel's interception rate seems to be diminishing. Like the fire control systems and their air defense network are clearly rationing interceptions, experiencing mechanical issues from overuse, and letting ordnance fall in unpopulated areas. However, strikes are still getting through to population centers despite lower intensity salvos. And yeah, this brings us to something a lot of people like to talk about, is most of Iran's arsenal is short-range missiles, which wouldn't be able to engage Israeli targets unless they were all moved and mobilized to the westernmost regions of Iran. But of course, Gulf bases, U.S. bases are imminently vulnerable to this portion of the arsenal, which is the largest one. And so we've started to move out air assets, unsecurable air assets, out of like Qatar and Bahrain and reposition them so they can't be targeted, which is also a really worrying sign. So it's impossible to make stockpile predictions via open source analysis. But one thing is clear: a depletion of Israeli munitions will serve as a serious trigger for the U.S. to greenlight strikes against Iranian nuclear hard sites. And I guess my concern is like what they envision, or at least like based off of, Israeli media, just listening to pundits and insiders talk about it, is they want regime change. And it seems like the U.S. does too. Something that would be friendly to Western interests, or do you think it's more of like a failed state thing, or what?
It's hard to tell, because sometimes I think the messaging again is consistently convoluted. If you look at even the Israeli side, this is all under the pretext of Iran's nuclear program and the idea that Iran was weaponizing its program, even though there's no evidence of it according to the IAEA, and there's no evidence of it according to U.S. intelligence. So IAEA, that does inspections, U.S. intelligence, they say this is not happening. Israel says it is happening. The president of the United States repeats whatever Israel says. Apparently, this is a trend between American presidents. So that's where we started. Oh, this is because of Iran's nuclear program. It very quickly shifted on the Israeli side to regime change. How I don't know how you do regime change through an aerial campaign. It seems like you would likely need, and this is your area of expertise, so I don't want to pretend like I know, but it seems like you would need some kind of boots on the ground, because how are things changing on the ground? Whether it's, I mean, I've seen Jerusalem Post yesterday, the editorial board had an article in which they said that, this is what Trump should be doing. He should, basically be pushing for regime change. And one of the points they brought up is that Iran should be partitioned. Now, I don't know when we decided that we're still partitioning countries. I thought that was the whole point of sovereignty. And then the idea of Iran specifically, a country that is in its own, historical mind, 2,500 years old. It's an extremely old country. To be told that it should be partitioned is wild to me. But on top of that, it is completely the opposite of anything that you can never say everybody, you can never make that universal of a statement, but would be wildly rejected and unpopular amongst Iranians, even the diaspora opposition that is not necessarily popular within Iran. Even they do not take that line, because it is completely against Iranian nationalist sentiments. So what Israel wants to do, if you think about all of that, to me seems like they just want to collapse the state. They just want, as long as the state is in chaos and Iran is in a weakened position, then that would satisfy the sort of needs that Israel has in this particular situation. I mean, we've seen what they've done everywhere else. It seems like the goal is generally destruction. The thing that is odd to me about the US wanting to enter this, especially under someone like Donald Trump, is that seems to be the exact opposite of what he has said repeatedly. So, and what purpose does it serve if the entire objective of the US government and what is in US interest is for Iran not to have a nuclear weapon? The best path for that was exactly what we were doing, which is engaging in diplomatic talks. What's also odd on the US side is the US, Witkoff was set to meet with Iranian officials on Sunday, 2 days before Israel attacked. So if suddenly the Trump administration doesn't want any negotiations, then why were we set to have them? I think it's more of a pressure tactic. I think from the perspective of someone like President Trump, it's more, I mean business, right? Like when I say this is what you need to do, or there will be attacks. Now Iran has clearly seen that he'll greenlight attacks from Israel, and that can create some kind of pressure tactic. But regime change, to me, I mean, the phrase is almost ridiculous at this point because of how often it fails. And by often, I mean always. I mean, Afghanistan, I think, is one of the most interesting examples because of the fact that it's the longest war we've ever had. We had boots on the ground for, 20 years?
Fighting every day to prop up a deeply, deeply unpopular government.
And we never got rid of the Taliban. The Taliban basically swept in within days and took over. So the idea that, and if you look at the sort of like strength and organization that the Islamic Republic has versus the Taliban, they're not comparable. So it just seems like this is just a lot of rhetoric and words that are being thrown around with no actual strategy or plan, unless the plan is they think that 90 million Iranians will say, yes, partition our country. It seems extremely, I would doubt that from any population. I would doubt that even more from this population.
Well, especially they're politically, I would characterize them based off everyone I've talked to who lives there, very politically active because, they've been on the imperialist chopping block for so many years. And of course, even before that, the war with Saddam and stuff, and like looking at Syria, looking at Libya, those are U.S. projects. And Syria, despite however people feel about it, has ended up in however you characterize the moment in Syria right now is very appealing to Western interests. And you ask, when has partition really worked or balkanization really worked through an aerial bombing campaign? Well, Syria is a pretty good example, I would say. Well, in tandem with U.S. and Mossad and Turkish and Gulf intelligence services funding different variations of militias and sectarian violence throughout the state to destabilize it. And so that would be a concern going forward. I mean, there's also like contentious organizations that we do fund within Iran itself. We could name like the Mujahideen El Khalq, the MEC would be one of them. There's others, especially there's also Saudi interests within militias in Iran itself too. But yeah, and even though it's like an ethnically diverse.
Really quickly to your Syria example, because actually it's interesting the way that I feel like now it's a really good example, because it's sort of being framed as, look, things worked out in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently the last, 15 years are being ignored as
Mm-hmm.
if there was no cost to what happened in Syria, as if it wasn't in a civil war for over a decade, millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands of people killed, and regional instability from that conflict. So it's being, and we don't know, with the current government in Syria, we don't really know where it's going to go. Obviously, al-Sharaa is someone who had links to groups like Al-Qaeda. So it's these are very sort of bizarre ways that a potential regime change operation in Iran is being justified. Again, Iran is a much larger country with a much larger population. So I don't know. I just see, yes, I mean, in theory, you have the potential to do this all many, many years down the line, but it's not being presented that way. It's being presented like, we can do this. Yeah, we can do this. Look what we did in Iraq. It took, mission accomplished. And it's like, that's not really what happened. So there's almost like a rewriting of these histories. Like, we crushed Saddam within, hours or days or something like that.
With the Taliban.
Exactly. Like, we got rid of the Taliban, we got rid of Saddam, we got rid of Assad. And it's like, but not really, not in the way that it's being described. And it's as if these last 24 years of watching the failed war on terror just didn't happen.
Right. And there's this sentiment that like now we're seeing a lot of nostalgia about that, because like the US military, very good at destroying conventional militaries and causing mass death and destroying governments. Now, nation building operations, counterinsurgencies, well, we have a terrible track record ranging back to Vietnam. So but the disturbing thing is we're seeing like the exact same propaganda that I was like 11 years old at the time, in 2001, prelude to Afghanistan, the ghost of weapons of mass destruction, the weaponization or the femme washing of women's conditions to justify violent occupation. We have to save the women from the Taliban. I mean, look, a lot of things to criticize the current government about, but what would be worse for women? A partitioned, balkanized, sectarian violence hellscape. So I'm definitely very concerned about that, and like the consent being manufactured within the mainstream media now. People saying like all we have to do is drop a few bombs, take out a few nuclear sites, and of course, like I personally believe that like Trump at this point, and of course, as you said, impossible to gauge what his thinking is, but I don't think there's a lot of people in the military command echelon who are certain that these massive ordnance penetrators, these 30,000-pound bombs, would even get the job done, because they've never really been used in combat before. So there's also that uncertainty floating around. It's just I get the sense that everyone's like floundering and trying to like make decisions on the fly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. It's like you can't get a read on what's going on, because it seems as if there's totally contradictory things happening. It's like, well, the pretext for this was attacking Iran's nuclear sites. Well, that's clearly not what Israel's goal is anymore, if it was ever that because the pretext, that's why it's a pretext. I mean, Iran did not have nuclear weapons. It was not on the cusp of having nuclear weapons. It's just not the case. So, and we're not even talking about the fact that actually Israel does have nuclear weapons. One of the things that no one ever talks about, or right. That most importantly, I would say, Israel is still committing genocide in Gaza. Like, Israel is a rogue, genocidal, nuclear armed state that is wreaking havoc through the region. And for some reason, the media shift, I can understand it if it's in the political rhetoric, but somehow the media shift is to focus now on this war of aggression on Iran, frame it as if Iran is the aggressor, even though clearly Israel is the one that attacked Iran and started a war. And it's like they're living in a parallel universe, if you've noticed, where you have like Israeli officials who say things like, Iran is targeting residences. First of all, Israel is hitting residences in Iran. But let's put that aside for a moment. They've committed domicide in Gaza. They've destroyed the entirety of Gaza. They're still starving Palestinians right now as we are speaking. They are still shooting at and slaughtering by the dozens every single day Palestinians trying to get food in Gaza under their aid program. And
well,
it's like
that's a game, by the way. Just wanted to put that in there. They're playing a game with that. So
yeah, the aid. I mean, it's not. You can't. That's not humanitarian aid. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't shoot people. It's more like Squid Games than doing
Yeah,
anything else.
exactly.
It's like you're literally shooting people as they're trying to get food. But all of this is, in my mind at least, it's all linked together. But for some reason, it's being compartmentalized when it's talked about in terms of political discourse and the way the media is trying to sell the public on this, well, Iran is a nuclear threat kind of a situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of understand why it's happening. My mother was a mainstream journalist. I know a lot of corporate like journalists associated with bigger outlets, and a lot of people are breathing a sigh of relief because they're like, oh my God, I don't have to pretend to have editorial standards around Gaza reporting right now because we can just do Iran.
Yeah.
But of course, like so many things have been normalized now. The shockwave from a Iranian missile strike this morning blew out windows and some foundations of a hospital, and there was a massive backlash within the Hasbara media. And I just had to respond like, look, guys, I said this in November 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Warfare is a lot like lawfare. You need to be really careful about what precedents you set. And now bombing hospitals is just a thing you can do now. Now, people used to be up in arms when Russia hit a medical target in downtown Kiev, but now that happens, it's not even a byline. So this is one of the consequences. The world is completely less safe. Journalists are less safe. And yeah, I think whatever warfare going forward, especially with regards to Iran strikes, will be a lot less discriminating. I think we even saw that when under the Trump administration first started sending out Houthi strike packages. Like, we hit a hospital. That's not something I ever saw in my military experience. No strike that would even come close to a hospital, with the exception of the 2015 one in Kunduz province under Obama, would have been authorized. So like even our own targeting parameters based off what I'm looking like have become way more aggressive and way more dismissive of civilian casualties. So that's another fun thing we have to look forward to.
Absolutely. And this has happened. This is one of the central criticisms of the Biden admin, as they just let Israel do whatever they wanted, was not only, I mean, and I've said this many, many times, the fact that they were slaughtering Palestinians in mass should have been enough. I shouldn't have to talk about other implications. Like, that's enough for people to stand up and say, wait a minute, why are we supporting this? But there were always going to be other consequences. And it was precisely this. It's like and it wasn't destroyed under Trump. You just can't make that claim. The international system, whatever you want to call it, international law, rules-based order, that was destroyed by Democrats. That was destroyed by the Biden administration. The Trump admin it's just continuity. They just latched on to whatever was already there, and they're continuing to go with that. But once those red lines had been crossed, you can't just say, because it's so interesting when you look at the way that, again, Israeli sort of official language is. It's like they're accusing Iran of committing a war crime. Israel has attacked every hospital in Gaza. It is unbelievable. By the way, Israel had attacked 2 Iranian hospitals first on June 15th and on June 17th. 2 different hospitals in Iran had already been hit with damage. Got basically no media coverage whatsoever. Now we have wall-to-wall coverage. So it's just the level of double standard and hypocrisy is so blatant that there's no even attempt to sort of cover it up with propaganda and rhetoric. It's just speaking to the void as if nobody has been there. But all of these red lines have already been crossed, and they were already crossed in Gaza. So there's I think you should hold any state accountable for war crimes or for attacking hospitals. Let's start with Israel, who's done it more than any other country in the world. I mean, we've never seen a systematic attack on healthcare. They have collapsed Gaza's healthcare system while blocking medicine from getting in. It's just unbelievable how much impunity Israel can operate with, and then have the audacity.
Yeah.
Yeah, to then say this is a war crime. It's like, well, you're the head of the War Crimes Inc. Like, maybe, sure, everybody should be held accountable for war crimes, but that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is Israel can do whatever it wants, and any response they're sort of appalled by. They're appalled at the idea that there is a military that is actually able to respond to what they started themselves by bombing Iran while Iran was engaged in talks with the United States. So it's surreal sometimes. I feel like I understand like the term gaslighting now. Like, sometimes I do start to question my own sanity. I'm like, wait, this seems like insane for you to say if you're an Israeli official. It seems insane, the things that they're posting and publishing, when we have seen the atrocities in Gaza for 20 straight months, a live stream genocide for 20 straight months, and the fact that Israel is the one that attacked Iran. Like, it's just so bizarre to see the things that they're saying. I'm like, so does Iran literally not have the right to self-defense, even when they are now bombed and attacked directly? Because when Israel attacked an Iranian embassy in Syria, in Damascus, there was questions about, well, are they allowed to do that? When Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, well, maybe they're allowed to do that. I think it's fairly clear they're not allowed to bomb a country. You're not allowed to bomb sovereign countries when there is no imminent threat to you and it is not self-defense.
Well, yeah, and technically that consulate should have been considered sovereign territory, like everywhere else in the world. And they're like, yes, but an IRGC commander was meeting. Intelligence officials were meeting with diplomats inside a consulate. That's never happened before. It's just so insane.
But I'm saying at least in those cases, not at least, I agree, of course, like all of those things are illegal. Also, carrying out an extrajudicial assassination in a sovereign country is also illegal. Like all of these. Look, I always use this example. Netanyahu came to the US when he was a wanted war criminal, as he's committing genocide. Would any state be able to assassinate Netanyahu on US soil? And if any of the Western world would say, well, that's allowed. I mean, he is a war criminal. So
no. But But if Israel manages to assassinate the Ayatollah over this weekend, everybody will, celebrate it as this massive intelligence coup.
Again, the issue becomes then we've basically rid ourselves of even the notion of international law. And you can do that. I mean, we can do that as a global society. I don't agree with it. I thought there was a reason why we have rules, but once you do it, that's the thing that's wild about the way that Israel is behaving now, is you can't do that and not understand that it has consequences. Once those red lines have been crossed, it's not just Iran. You're inviting Russia, you're inviting China, you're inviting every country in the world to do the exact same thing, because there's the realization that there are no consequences to it. You can just do it. I mean, that's the environment that has been created, but it was not created by countries of the global south. It was created by the very countries that claim to be, hold the mantle of civilization and international law and rules.
Yeah. And, I think you brought up continuity now between, the Biden administration, but what's interesting about the continuity now is that we've had an entire first presidency for Donald Trump. And, his 180 position on Iran is, I think, multifaceted. He campaigned on being an anti-war candidate, but that has never been true, even from his first presidency. He armed Ukraine in ways that the neoliberal warlord Obama was unwilling to do, used diplomacy as deception to assassinate General Qassam Soleimani of the IRGC, dropped an insane amount of ordnance on Afghanistan, and I can go on and go on and go on. But like, I think one of the pieces with regards to Iran is his interests lie in a complete like pan-Arab Abraham Accords, where all these dynastic Arab regimes throughout the Gulf, Levant, and North Africa formally normalized diplomatic and commercial relations with Israel. He also wants to bring the traditionally like east-west fence-sitting Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, closer to Western interests by investing massive AI infrastructure to rival that of China. It's not going to work, but they're going to try it anyways. You know, if Iran can be broken and controlled, well, the Saudi government won't really be shedding any tears. And if Iran can be broken and controlled, you know, that solidifies us as the regional and global hegemon in that area. And that's my assessment of like how he thinks, for the same reason. I mean, you live in California, that he's making an example out of LA as like the cultural hub of the Hispanic immigrant community. And like, if he can break resistance there, like the rest of the country is good to go.
That's I mean, I can see your points essentially. What I would say is interesting is Iran has focused its attacks entirely on Israel, right? They haven't hit any US interests, any US assets, any US personnel. They also have not tried to, not yet, close the Strait of Hormuz, which 20% of the world's oil goes through, hit any of their oil refineries and gas and oil fields in neighboring countries. That would then exact an economic cost not only on those countries, but globally, right? It would exact an economic cost. That's when it would start to hurt us. I mean, Iran cannot directly attack the United States geographically, but it can attack US interests, personnel, and assets in the region. And they haven't done any of that. There is a very calculated, measured reason why they haven't done it, because they know that that's going to invite, obviously, all of these parties to then, the US would immediately then enter the war, or it would fray the relationships that they've built in recent years with their, Arab partners in the Persian Gulf. Right now, you have those states condemning Israel's actions. And because what they're worried about, we keep talking about it like you can just break apart Iran and regime change, and it's a very simple process. It's not. It's an extremely destructive process with just the potential for really, really negative adverse effects and fallout. The other states, the neighbors in the region, know this, and this is why they are working in the background trying to get this to be resolved. Because if that happens, their Vision 2030 and Vision 2040 projects, all of the time and energy that has been spent on building up infrastructure, on diversifying their economies, on trying to get tourists to come to these countries, all of that is gone if you have that kind of regional war that breaks out. So if you really think about it, though, the only entity that benefits, and by that I mean really just the coalition government of Netanyahu himself, is Israel and Netanyahu. I mean, you can't even say Israeli society. This doesn't benefit Israeli society either. But it does benefit him and his coalition. No one else. This does nothing for US interests. And in fact, if we allow it to go further, that's when Iran can start to sort of use those tactics to exact a cost. But it's not trying to right now. And I think that's something that people don't understand. I'll give you one example of what I mean. If you look at Iran's attacks on Israel, retaliations, I should say, because of Israeli attacks, last year, there was a lot of sort of commentary about, oh, look how weak Iran's, missiles and drones and all of these things are. They can't even hit a target in Israel. Now you see that they can. I mean, that's very clear. They can hit targets in Israel, but they weren't doing it. They weren't doing it because they didn't actually want a bigger war, because there is an asymmetry that they're very aware of. If you look at conventional militaries, of course Israel has the military edge. It has nuclear weapons, ironically, the one that actually has them. So there's an asymmetry of conventional military power, but we're not thinking of the asymmetric ways in which Iran can exact costs if they are continuously getting bombarded, if they're continuously getting, if their infrastructure is being destroyed, or if you have, foreign governments that are trying to come in and partition the country. Of course, they're not going to sit there and say, sure, partition this country that has existed for millennia.
Yeah. Um, yeah, but I think like in my most despairing moments where I understand like the hawkish mentality of like the think tank world and so some beltway
Explain it.
people in
I really
DC.
don't get it. I
It's about,
genuinely don't.
it's about China.
Hmm.
That it's all been about Iran's about China. Okay, so first of all, the U.S. is not to be trusted, right? Even when it comes to like diplomacy, it has a long history of using diplomatic sideshows as tools of political assassinations, like Soleimani, Nasrallah. They were the U.S. was trying to broker a ceasefire, and it seemed to be like progressing, and then they killed him. And then, they gave political cover under the guise of nuclear talks for Israel to conduct a preemptive strike. And, I don't want to say like pay attention to theater. Iran says it will not negotiate under Israeli attacks, and Israel has now vowed vengeance after an Israeli hospital sustained damage from nearby strikes. But look, I think like what this is all about, because the U.S. is trying, even since I was in 2011, we were in Afghanistan, and we were talking about winding down the war in order to shift to China, to Taiwan. We didn't like U.S. Central Command was taking too many resources from U.S. Indo-Pac Command, and that was where the next theater of operations is. And when it comes to Iran, of course, they just finished that railway system of oil and gas exports into China, so they don't have to rely so much on their shadow fleet to escape sanctions and deliver it via maritime passages. And of course, because U.S. foreign policy has been so bad, we've done this maximum pressure sanction campaign on Iran that Iran, one of the largest oil producers, now has to sell at discounted prices oil to our largest rival, China. Great foreign policy, guys. One of the things is like also Iran has this escalating security relationship with Russia, which no one saw coming because of all the bad bloods going back to the Great Game and Russian imperialism and stuff like that. But because of our foreign policy in Ukraine, they've got solidified the relationship. Now Iran is is a hopeful contender for BRICS, and BRICS isn't as effective as I think some of my colleagues think. It's rife with its own contradictions, but Iran's important to China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, the new digital Silk Road. And if a regime, and this is like in the most neocon fever dreams within like the Atlantic Council and other hawk tanks, were to have a friendly regime, it would further isolate China, and then Pakistan would be sandwiched in between India, whose increasingly fascist government is tied in with Israel and the United States, dismantle their nuclear program. We've had people in Israeli media talking about that, like after Iran, Pakistan's next, and then you'd have this iron curtain of isolation from Korea to Okinawa to Taiwan, India, Iran. And I don't think it's going to work. But that's part of the Iran question, is inextricably linked to isolating, smothering, and choking out China.
I think it's the part where I don't think it's going to work that confuses me the most.
Yeah.
It's like, because all of it is built on a lot of variables. The most
Right.
important thing being that you got the quote friendly government in Iran, and that we've just moved past all of the things that have to happen for that to happen. It's all the steps in between that are being skipped that I don't understand. It's like, well, how do you plan to actually get there? Again, aerial bombardment seems like that would take a very, very long time. I mean, this is a country of, mind you, what's happening in between all of these things? It's a country of 90 million people. 90 million people. How many refugees are you going to cause? Where do the refugees go? I don't want to like get into the ridiculousness, the xenophobia, the racism that goes into the sort of like anti-immigrant stance that exists in Europe and in the United States. But it does beg the question, if you don't want refugees, why do you keep creating them? you're talking about a country of 90 million people. What's going to happen to those people? Where are the people who become refugees going to go? I mean, these are basic questions that no one is answering, because for some reason in someone's mind, there's this example of the magical time that we said regime change, and it just happened. It doesn't, and to think that it would happen with, I mean, Iran is a country that, the Islamic Republic is a government that came from a revolution.
Mhm.
One of the reasons we talk about the IRGC all the time, but what is the IRGC? The IRGC is a parallel military force. Iran basically has two militaries. It has the traditional and conventional military, and then it has the IRGC, which has its own, basically, it parallels the other. It has its own intelligence branch. It has its own, everything. Why did they do this? What was the logic behind it? Because one of the ways that the Shah was overthrown in 1979 was military defections. Because if you don't control the guns in a country, if you don't control the violence and the force, then people can actually stand up and rise up against you. And if the force that's supposed to protect you, the security apparatus that's supposed to protect you, stops doing that, that's when you get, revolution or regime change, or however you want, depending on who's doing the changing. So they understood this, and that's why they created a parallel military force that is ideologically, not just materially tied to the state, but also ideologically vetted to want to defend the state as it exists. That's an extremely complicated thing to look at that did not exist in any of the scenarios that we've talked about before. Not in Iraq in the same way, not in Syria in the same way. But these are things that are completely outside of any of the conversations you see taking place. There's no explanation of how is this actually going to happen.
Yeah, and also it's not just the IRGC and the conventional military. There's also, the U.S. military. Some military scholars consider Iran to be a garrison state because of all the paramilitary militias, the Basij, that can be placed under IRGC command too. So like, but here's the problem: like these feverish Heritage Foundation dreams are they were planted by the same guys who thought, yeah, Iraq, it's going to be fine. We're going to overthrow Saddam, and then Iran's next. And they were completely blown away when Iran started like arming Shia militias in Iraq to bog down U.S. forces for years, so they couldn't actually make a move on Iran. It's the same people coming up with these ideas. And I think one of our earlier episodes, you brought up the great point, like U.S. foreign policy is entirely ideological in a way that like a theocratic government like Iran isn't, which is bizarre.
Yeah. Oh, US foreign policy is much, much more ideological. There is zero logic behind the US entering a war that Israel just started. Besides, we have to protect Israel, which it does not make any sense if what is in the interest, I mean, and this is the line that is used with repeated administrations, if it is in the interest of the United States, which I believe it is, for Iran not to have nuclear weapons, then that was already resolved 10 years ago. We had resolved this 10 years ago. It was these very hawkish voices in Trump's head back in 2018 and the Israeli side saying, it's a terrible deal. We got to get out of this deal. We're only in this situation because the US withdrew from a deal that prevented Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So, I mean, when we talk about policy, the problem is none of it is going to the root of what the actual problem is. Let's use Gaza as an example and Hamas, right? Hamas is supposed to be the whole point of, well, not the actual point. The actual point of what Israel is doing is a very intentional genocide. But rhetorically, what they say is it's to get hostages and dismantle Hamas, destroy Hamas, right? These are the two main Israeli talking points in terms of what they're doing in Gaza. Hamas and they're like, well, we've killed, whatever ridiculous number they give of Hamas combatants, except for the fact that then U.S. intelligence and I believe Israeli intelligence, but at the very least U.S. intelligence says that Hamas has basically recuperated the same numbers. Why? Because you just slaughtered everyone.
Yeah,
like these are not people, and if you just kill a bunch of people, they're not going to react to it. So it's this constant cycle that goes over and over and over again, because the assumption is that we are liberators and we will be greeted as such. And that doesn't work when you killed someone's kid or you killed their mom. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, they created a whole new acronym: Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. And to that end, they seek to, and I know the Mossad's in there, and the CIA is in there, and Gulf intelligence services are in there because this is what we do. We did it back when I was in special operations, stoking ethnic and religious tensions in order to destabilize the government. You know, standard U.S. imperialist stuff. Do
Which
you think
usually
that
has
what?
which
I'm
usually
sorry.
has blowback, right? Like that's where
Yeah,
blowback comes from. It's like we do these things and then something happens and like, well, how did that happen? Well, we train
yeah.
them.
But
We
it seems like um, Israel bombing civilian targets, bombing Tehran, bombing other cities, other sites. It's kind of having an opposite, like, unifying effect.
so it's definitely not, making everybody happy. I can say
Mhm.
that. Are there some people who are? Yes. And I always say this, like, look, it's a country of 90 million people. They have a
Mhm.
lot of different political views. If you go to the sort of two ends of the spectrum, one would be staunch ideological support for the Islamic Republic, just absolutely diehard supporters of the Islamic Republic. On the other end, you have people who are so are so strong in their dissident point of view that they would welcome foreign intervention, that they would welcome
Mhm.
Israel bombing them. These are not the majority views. These are the more extreme views. In the middle is where you have, I would say, the predominant view that we've seen is people who are against their own government. They are against the Islamic Republic. They do not, they're suppressed politically and socially. The Iranian economy has been in a tailspin for like a decade, so they're not doing well. There's a lot of very, very legitimate grievances and dissatisfaction amongst the Iranian population. But what you've seen a lot of people comment is that doesn't mean that we welcome being bombed. This should be a basic thing to anybody who's watching or listening. Just think about it. Think about, people talk about wanting their governments to change. I think you can find a lot of Americans who want their government to change. Not
Most of
just
them.
not just in administration, by the way, but the fundamental nature of our government has come into question, and that's why you have. I mean, Donald Trump is the culmination of an establishment system that has not worked, and that's how you get someone like Donald Trump who is so far outside of that establishment. Would those same Americans, the ones who are, basically protesting and shouting and saying, this is fascism, our country is being destroyed. This is the way that many Americans think. This is an undeniable fact. Would those same people then welcome, if Russia started bombing the United States? Probably not. I mean, this is an intuitive thing to understand. You are usually not greeted as liberators when you are doing it this way.
No.
These are not, they call it a targeted attack. There are apartment buildings that have been completely collapsed. Hundreds of Iranian civilians have been killed already. So this idea that Israel targets but Iran attacks, there's an asymmetry in the civilian deaths, just like you see. Well, I mean, Gaza is a ridiculous example now, but in past conflicts, you see the numbers are completely inflated because you're not just targeting, you're not hitting targeted sites. An apartment building is not a targeted site. It's where civilians live, and they're doing it over and over again. So that is what is causing some sort of unification in terms of Iranians being, and it's not across the board. I want to make that clear. It's not everybody, but there is a palpable sense of, we are not okay with this. Like, they do not want a war. They want to live their lives. And they understand, because they're in the region, they've seen what's happened to every neighboring country. They don't want that to happen. They don't want that to happen to their country.
Yeah. And people generally want a popular revolution, not, a state, foreign actor sponsored one either, because I don't think people are naive enough to know that that would be in their best interest. We already saw what happened after Mossadegh got deposed.
Well, and they've seen, I mean, you just look at Gaza. They've seen what Israel has specifically done. And Israel has shown that it has no regard for international law, no regard for anything, right? When you reach the point where you're doing the actual Hunger Games, where you are starving people and then shooting at them while they're trying to get food, there's nothing left. So when you look at Gaza and you see the level of destruction, and you know that Israel has done this and just keeps pounding them more and more every day with basically nothing left, that should probably instill a lot of fear in people that, well, what's going to be the end game here? Because if they keep getting hit back and they keep saying, well, we're going to hit you even harder. Why is anybody asking the entire capital city of 10 million people to be evacuated if you're targeting things? Why do 10 million people have to evacuate a city if you're doing targeted attacks? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Part of me was like, oh, he's doing the reality TV star thing, being absolutely hyperbolic in some ways, which is annoying and insane. That was posted on Truth Social, and people actually, because he's the president of the most violent nation on earth, people had to take it seriously.
I mean, but I think it's a combination, to be completely honest. I think you have to take it seriously, again, because Israel is the one attacking you, and it's very clear evidence that Israel does not care about civilians or targeting civilians. Like, there's just not, that argument is one of the most absurd arguments that can be made. You do not flatten an entire strip of land on accident. You do it on purpose. And this whole idea, what have we been sold on, or what have they tried to sell for 20 months? Well, Hamas is there. They use human shields. That's what's happening. That's why we have to hit all of these places. Well, guess where Israel's, security, military, intelligence buildings and apparatuses are set up? All around where there are civilians, because that's true of every country. Where is the Pentagon? The Pentagon is not in some underground bunker secret location. It's a gigantic building in the middle of the capital city. So it's just this rhetoric has been used over and over again by Israel. And obviously it's been questioned and debunked over and over again. But now seeing it play out in a war setting that they started, where they're actually getting hit back, is where it's interesting to see suddenly they think these things, then they matter. Then you're not supposed to just throw bombs on a city, even though we saw them destroy Beirut.
Yeah.
Nasrallah is there. We can hit 6 buildings full of civilians simultaneously and crush them to the ground and create a crater in the earth because that's an assassination. It's just, you can probably tell the frustration in my voice, but it's just crazy to have witnessed this for this long and then see even the slightest impact on Israel be turned into a sort of a hysteria, which tells you the fact that essentially the point is the only lives that matter are Israeli lives.
Mm-hmm.
Iranian lives don't matter. Syrian lives don't matter. Palestinian lives certainly don't matter. Lebanese, no one's life matters but Israelis. That's the only time that suddenly injuries and deaths and targeting and all of these things become important that we should be paying attention to.
Right. Yeah. And we also saw that because they had the I don't know, lack of self-awareness to post these on social media of them like locking foreign workers out of bomb shelters and other Israelis because they didn't want like them to be overcrowded because they can't be uncomfortable. I would just like to say one point, like if we look at history, the Iranians have a lot higher threshold for tolerating austerity and hardship and casualties than the Israelis do. So if this keeps panning out, I'm not sure how well it's going to work out for the settler colony, because if we look at post-colonial colonial history, the second the settlers start leaving because they're unsafe or they're less comfortable back home, not looking good for the project.
I think the thing that's so frustrating is that all of this and whatever is to come, which we don't know right now, was entirely preventable. Mm-hmm. But it's Israel's own sabotage. This has happened over and over again. They sabotaged the Iran nuclear deal that was agreed to in 2015 and pressured the Trump administration the first time to pull out of that agreement. As this Trump administration was trying to negotiate, and you could see in the language that someone like Witkoff and other officials were using that they were trying to actually come to an agreement, you have someone like Netanyahu come in and use phrases like the Libya model very intentionally, right? Like, why do you use the Libya model? Why would any other country that's Libya in this case, right? That's playing the role of Libya, accept that model, because obviously that didn't really work out for Libya. So it's just, we're here. I cannot emphasize this enough. We're here because a genocidal state has been allowed to do absolutely anything it wants. And so far, no US administration is willing to stand up against it. And I'm actually, if I'm being completely honest, I'm a little surprised by Trump, because I thought that if anybody would sort of take a non-establishment point of view and maybe, stop Israel. I mean, this is not unprecedented in US history. Look back to the 1982 and Ronald Reagan. Like, Reagan stood up to Israel and said, no, like, the bombing stops now. 20 minutes later, guess what happened? Because it's the US that has the leverage. But when you look at it, when you look at the past 20 months, it doesn't look like it's the US that has the leverage. It looks like Israel is the one providing the US with billions of dollars in military aid every year. It looks like Israel is the one providing the US with the, weaponry and military technology that they need. It looks like everything, or it's Israel that's providing the US with diplomatic immunity. That's not the case, but it looks that way because US leadership fails to stand up to it and will take down US interests along with them.
I was looking for this great quote about that, about, how we definitely use the existence of Israel to do our dirty work. Didn't the German chancellor or one of the foreign ministers say that Israel does our dirty work? Yeah.
It was
does our dirty work in the region. Yeah. So I guess,
he also said, by the way, that if Iran would return to the negotiating table, there would be no reason for further military escalation, as if Iran was not literally at the negotiating table when Israel attacked them.
Oh boy, who are the real ideologues, huh? These Western politicians or these crazy Muslim governments? So yeah, I think that's what we got. But the U.S. basically going forward in terms of diplomacy is not to be trusted. Again, having a long history of using diplomatic sideshows as a tool of political assassination and sabotage, and a number of other things. And this, and a lot of the ambiguity that we're seeing from the Trump administration is around, like, he believes that ambiguity and threats and leveraging the economic and military might of the United States is like how you get a deal. But of course, the stakes are like higher than they ever have been in the last 2 years. Obviously, geopolitically, not for the loss of life in Gaza, but this entire situation could devolve at a moment's notice. And if we go to war, it will be less justified than the 2003 Iraq invasion, which wasn't justified at all. But at least we had the false decency to lie to the UN Security Council with Colin Powell and the yellow cake and gin up bloodlust in Congress. Now we have nothing. The illusion of like democratic trappings has become too bothersome to maintain.
I think one of the things that is also bizarre is, don't we have a constitution? I mean, I thought we did. Like, isn't there, the president isn't the one that declares war. I mean, is the argument going to be that the US president can bomb any country that he wants?
I mean, there's executive privilege. There's the War Powers Act that's been like horrendously interpreted when Bush authorized those two, not wars, overseas contingency operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So yeah, you can fudge it. Just change the wording.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're at right now. I am concerned that something crazy is going to happen tonight or over this weekend. But of course, we don't know what it is because I don't think a lot of decision makers or policy makers know what it is either.
Well, I don't, because to your point, I think earlier, and something that I think is apparent to anybody we've now had Trump be president for, one term, and now 5 months into the new term. His nature is unpredictable. That's also quite true. Like, he's not predictable in the way that he does things. And so I think that creates a lot of unease and tension. Like, even this announcement today of, there might be negotiations in the next 2 weeks, so he'll decide in the next 2 weeks. To your point, it's like, well, but is something going to happen? Because the other factor is, of course, even if the US doesn't do anything, something can happen because Israel can do it. And if Israel does it, does that then create a new, a new calculus from the Iranian side? The one thing I will say that I think is will be fascinating from a historical point of view about all of this is it's Israel's actions that have changed the calculus of Iran in terms of whether or not they should weaponize, right? This whole time, Iran has made a political decision. It's not the inability to do so, but the political decision not to weaponize. They're not going to have a nuclear weapons program. Basically, with this attack, what Israel has done is create a situation where maybe that's the only thing in their minds, this is the only thing that would protect them. And what people should be understanding is that public opinion in Iran has changed about it as well. 10 years ago, the JCPOA was a very, very popular agreement 10 years ago. Things have changed dramatically for many reasons, but also that public opinion has shifted because you see more people commenting and saying things like, well, this wouldn't be happening if we had a nuclear weapon, though, would it?
Right. And, I think it's just bad news for any proliferation activists because what's the DPRK in North Korea going to say? Like, oh, they already tell our negotiators, oh, you want us to, to disband our nuclear program? How did that work out for Gaddafi? Now they have Iran as an example too. No one's giving up their nukes. In fact, more regional players might secretly pursue it as well. So good job, US, for increasing and Israel for increasing global security. Awesome. Yep. So, well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to put your links in the description. You can follow Dr. Assal Rad on X. Anywhere else? You're on Instagram now.
Yes, recently migrated to Instagram as well.
Okay. Well, again, and of course, we'll link the book in there, your recent book in there as well. So thank you so much for coming on. We will continue our ongoing coverage of Iran as the world thinks further and further into upside down madness. Cheers, y'all. And we will see you tomorrow for our weekly Patreon episode. Have a good night. Bye-bye.